good afternoon, and welcome to the American College of Healthcare Executives Central Illinois Chapter webinar entitled Building the Hospital of Tomorrow, Rehabilitate, Renovate, or Replace. ACHE has authorized 1.5 of credits of qualified education credits for this presentation. After the webinar, you will be directed to a short survey, which the Education Committee hopes you will take the time to complete to fill out and review. If any IT problems arise, please visit anymeeting.com/support for further assistance. As we begin the presentation, please mute your telephone lines by pressing *5 until the question and answer portion of the event. On the left-hand side of the webinar platform screen is a text box to write a question to the presenter that will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dave Adcock, President and Principal of Longview Consulting, David Schreiner, CEO and President of KSB Hospital, and Brad Solberg, President and CEO of Hammond-Henry Hospital. Today, this group of healthcare executives will be discussing building the hospital tomorrow. In today's competitive marketplace, significant capital expenditure decisions can make or break a healthcare organization and the career of the executives tasked with such decisions. No capital decision may be greater than the construction of a new facility or the substantial renovation of an existing one. After years of relative dormancy, the healthcare construction boom continues throughout the U.S. for a variety of reasons, many of which impact both small community hospitals and large urban health systems alike. The most common reasons for the renovations, expansions, and replacements include aging facilities, population growth, market demand, and the need to improve operational efficiencies. Additionally, competition moves organizations to incorporate the latest advances in care delivery, medical technology, new building codes, and the healing design elements to enhance the patient experience through the surrounding environment. Changes in building codes and patient safety standards also drive the need for construction and modification. Topics during this discussion will include what factors influence the executive's decision to utilize limited financial resources for their organization's physical plant, how would a new or updated facility enhance or hinder current operations or market share, would renovating and expanding the current facility be easier, take less time, and cost less than new construction, and how will the green movement impact future facility planning. Next, I would like to welcome our moderator, Dave Adcock. Dave is an experienced healthcare executive and entrepreneur. David founded Longview Consulting in 2009 after working in the executive leadership roles within a large healthcare system. David's experience includes market assessments, business development, and clinical operations. He has developed new services, completed CONs, and directed marketing activities. Currently, David is providing consulting services for EHR implementations and meaningful use or engagements with Illinois hospitals and clinics, as well as serving as CFO and COO for a newly established FQHC. David is also a partner and co-founder of Transfer Solutions, a startup medical device manufacturer in the fall prevention market. Welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you very much, Leslie. I appreciate the introduction. It's my privilege to be able to moderate today and to introduce our two speakers. First, David Schreiner serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer at KSB Hospital in Dixon, an 80-bed acute care facility. Mr. Schreiner began his healthcare career as a radiology technologist. David is adjunct faculty member for the University of St. Francis Health Services Administration graduate program. He has taught marketing and planning, administration, management, sociology, and managed care both in the classroom and online. In addition to the above experiences, Mr. Schreiner serves on over a dozen boards ranging from his church to his children's schools to his local Chamber of Commerce and a local bank board. In 2007, he was named the Dixon Citizen of the Year. David has finished 10 marathons and became an Ironman in 2005 by competing in Ironman, Wisconsin, a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike, and 26.2-mile run. Wow, that's quite an accomplishment there, Dave. The next person I'd like to introduce, our other speaker, is Brad Solberg. Brad has been CEO at Hammond-Henry since 2011. He has 27 years of hospital leadership experience serving in hospitals in Ohio, Michigan, and North Dakota. He received his bachelor's degree from Concordia College, Moorhead, Minnesota, and he's Master's of Healthcare Administration from the University of Minnesota. Solberg joined the American College of Healthcare Executives in 1995 and achieved fellow status in 2002. He was elected regent for Central Illinois in 2003 and served in that capacity for 3 years. He received the ACAG Distinguished Service Award in 2011. He currently serves on the board of Illinois Critical Access Hospital Network and Illinois Provider Trust. He is also active in his community as he serves on the board of the Geneseo Chamber of Commerce for 7 years, including 2 separate terms as board president. He is also a member of Rotary and serves on his church council. I'd also like to add both these gentlemen helped found this chapter as we're sponsoring this today. It's been my pleasure to work with them over the many years of the chapter. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Schreiner. Dave, I think you're going to get us started.
What factors influence the decision to use limited financial resources when we talk about facilities? All of us obviously have some limitations on the resources that we use. At KSP Hospital, one of the things that we put a lot of attention to is the idea of making sure that our facility plans integrate with our overall organizational strategy and the strategic plan that we have moving forward. We update our strategic plan on a yearly basis, and it's a 3-year plan moving forward. We have 3 teams that we use at KSB to look at major issues that we have in the organization. The first is information technology, the second is human resources, and the third is facilities. So we meet on a quarterly basis, and we review how facility changes help us in our progress and our advancement towards our strategic goals as outlined in our strategic plan. So that sounds like a lot of text as I go through it, but the take-home message is that idea that everything we do from a facilities perspective is consistent with what our strategic plan is moving towards. Market share is certainly something that's very important for all of us, and as we look at who our target audience is, this might be one of those dreaded questions where the answer is all of the above. We have to thoroughly understand what our market share is and ask questions about what drives that. And so as we look at facility enhancements in our current operations, is the reason for market share changes related to our facilities? And will changes that we make to our facilities have an impact on that market share, and how will we go about measuring that? So that's very important to us as we make those decisions as well. And then we have that choice of, do we look at modifications of our existing facility, or do we look at going somewhere else, what I might describe as Greenfield? So the build in place versus the Greenfield concept. There are many different factors that go into this. If we're looking at building in place, we have to think about the impact on the environment as we begin that process. So what's happening in the floor below the construction, and what's happening above, what's happening in the adjacent areas. What do we have to do from a staffing perspective in order to meet the needs of our patients during the ongoing construction? What about entrance and exit paths for construction workers, for the materials that are used while the project is going on? So what impact will it have on the current service delivery? Are we able to bring our current facilities up to the code? We operate in an environment that we have buildings going back to the 1960s, the 1950s, and as these codes change, regardless of how much it costs, are we able to meet the codes that will be in place when the project is completed? And then in any community, and especially in small communities, what are the political implications of leaving downtown? Dixon is a community of about 16,000 people. KSB employs right at 1,000 employees, and we're located right on the edge of the downtown area. So it is very important to our city leaders as well as our board of directors that we continue to be that cornerstone of our downtown. If we were to move those employees out in the cornfield, so to speak, somewhere, that would have some very dramatic impacts on the economy of Dixon, on the way that our patients access the organization. That's been talked about periodically here in Dixon at KSB on whether or not we want to look at space. And in our particular example, it's not the best way for us to serve our patients and their families. So we made that decision to work with what we have and design and renovate in place. So when we look at where we want to go, what are the issues that are facing us? I'm guessing that many of you that are listening have an environment where your inpatient volume is going down. Historically, and when we look at year to year, KSB's inpatient volume is going down by 15 to 20%. That's a big piece for us. So we have to decide, what are our patients going to want 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and where are those services going to be delivered? That's not always an easy thing to do. If we look at the three sections of our business, we have the inpatient, the ambulatory, and our medical group. And we know that our growth is coming in the ambulatory and the medical group components on that. So we want to focus our construction efforts on our service line growth areas. And how do we prioritize the capital resources when it comes to new construction? We all have so many places where we need to spend money. IT, for many of us, is certainly what feels like a black hole, at least at our place it does, in that we would have, we'd never have enough money to do all the things we want to do from an IT perspective. And I would suggest that we come back to the idea of how does it fit into our strategic plan. We have to, again, skate to where the puck's going to be. We want to begin with the end in mind. And one of the questions that we ask when we consider a project, whether it's IT, HR, or facilities, is if we were sitting here a year from now and deciding whether or not that decision was correct, how would we measure that success? Or what are the things that we would look at to say whether or not we met the goals? Is it market share? Is it patient satisfaction? Is it staff and physician satisfaction? Who are the key stakeholders? The board, and the board. So in the CEO chair, you have to make sure that you understand what the priorities are for a board of directors. A good friend of mine has used the analogy that as the CEO, when you come in every morning, you set your head down in the chopping block, and if it gets to 6 or 7 o'clock at night and nothing has fallen, that's a good day. And you come back tomorrow and you do it again. So in any high-risk type ventures, and as Leslie read early on, facility investments certainly fall into the high-risk category. We just have to make sure that our strategy is aligned and our goal is aligned with the communities that we serve. And then as we move to the place about what's important, we want to make sure that we speak with the users, the end users, patients, staff, community members, vendors to some extent. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that the project that we have in front of us is truly going to make progress for us towards our strategic plan. And so how do we measure return on investment? The difficult thing with this is sometimes there is no return on investment. For example, if we have an inpatient facility that is aging and needs to be updated from an aesthetic perspective, sometimes that's the best investment we can make. Although it may not drive market share, it may not dramatically improve either patient satisfaction or staff satisfaction. It's simply something that has to be done to keep our standards at the level that we expect them to be, and most importantly, our communities and our staff expect them to be. The other challenge are those times when the best return on investment is not necessarily consistent with our strategic plan. I'm sure that I'm probably the only one on the call that has ever had a physician demand new technology or new space. We look around at our competitors, and sometimes the actions of our competitors can drive where we need to go and how our strategic plan might change. So that ROI is not easily measurable, and we have to be careful about making sure that we don't stray from the goals that we have in our strategic plan, and any facility improvements that we do are consistent with that. What degree do environmental factors play? Again, it's all about the demographics. Again, the strategic plan is a big part of that. If If your organization is losing market share, we want to figure that out first and try to make that analysis of whether or not facility improvements are going to move that needle in the proper direction. So will facility enhancements reverse that trend, or are there other competitive issues that should be considered before the project begins? And as far as design choices, the lessons that I have learned with this is inclusion is perhaps the most important component of the entire process. Patients, physicians, staff, community members, vendors, again, the more people that we bring in to be included in the conversation, the better results that we have had. One of the more successful tools that we have used for that is building the space in a mock-up format somewhere close to the facility and allowing all of those key demographic components to go in and feel and touch and look at that space somewhere else. So, for example, when we began refurbishing all of our patient rooms, we built a mock-up room in a place very close to the main hospital, and we changed that several times before we actually moved to swinging hammers and getting that project started. So again, inclusion is very important for us. How can we design the facilities that improve the experience without appearing wasteful? Again, what does improve mean? Does it lead to better clinical quality? Is it a better look? Do we improve the environment for our patients? And we all know that regardless of what we do with the environment, for many patients it still comes down to having great food, delivered at the right time, the kind of stuff that tastes good, it's warm. How do we get that right? And so again, we want to make sure that the moves that we're making are going to move us towards the goals that we have through our strategic plan, and what are the things that we can change. When we talk about patient safety, as we say in the slide, it's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and really anything that goes within any of those three categories. It's so much easier to design an environment that really makes it almost impossible to not operate in a safe manner. The way that we have looked at that is we have dramatically increased the number of patient lifts that we have in our rooms. We know that if a very busy clinical person has to go more than about 3 or 4 doorways down to get a lift, they're not going to do that. So we're putting those in more of our rooms. We look at things like hand washing stations. We know how important hand washing is. So let's put it right by the door. Let's not force that busy caregiver to go out of their way in order to do that. Things like PPE equipment, we have to make sure that that's easily available. So patient safety needs to be talked about at every single design and construction meeting as you go through the process. Community perception is certainly important with any facility enhancement, and I think it's incumbent upon us to promote that as we begin the project, explaining to the community what we're doing as we go along, and remembering at the end of the day that it's really all about the individual. If you are reliant upon any kind of tax money, what kind of impact is that going to have? Is it something that's of interest to that individual person? If you're redoing your OB department, that's not of great interest perhaps to your Medicare community. Are the premiums going up? Are you going to charge me more? How's it going to affect the price structure that we have here in the hospital? So my learnings around that have been that transparency and communication and finding your way to take your show on the road, going out to the various organizations that are there in your community and keeping that information going as we move forward. My apologies for the technology glitches that we had in the beginning. I look forward to answering your questions after we have an opportunity to hear from Mr. Solberg. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. This is Brad Solberg. I am the CEO, there we go, of Hammond-Henry Hospital. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the project designed to be patient kind. That was the theme for our project, and we'll get more into the meat of the decision processes, factors which influenced our plan and impact on operations and market share, etc. But first I wanted to just touch on a couple things. This is the front of our hospital. When I talk about the front, it's from the northwest. Nice aerial view, nice front. But you can see toward the back, there was a lot of a typical community hospital where a hospital started in 1901, and we just started adding on from there. And all of a sudden, you've got a collection of buildings that you try and hope that they come together. But that was one of the things that we talked about in terms of overall goal. And setting goals, like Dave talked about, is so important, because as you go through a building project, you're going to stray from day to day, actually, throughout the building process, but making sure that those goals are something that you don't waver from. So this, again, is right from our capital campaign presentation. I think I made about 40 presentations out in the public when we did the capital campaign that coincided with the building project. So you can see that Hammond-Henry Hospital is a public district hospital founded in 1901. And in fact, my old office was located in the 1901 building. So to tell people that my door was always open to them, yeah, it was open, but you had to go up 5 narrow steps and through two doors to get into my office. But again, it was located within the hospital, right in the very center of the hospital, because buildings just kind of migrated over the last 110 years. $26 million annual budget, and we'll talk more about that later. The number of full-time and part-time employees puts us right near the top of the employers. We're right below the Geneseo School District for employment. 16 physicians on staff. That's also gone up in part because of the building project. And what I did, every time I go out in the community, we put patient satisfaction where we stand, because we all know that if it gets measured, it gets people's attention here internally a lot more. So we're very proud of what we've done with our Press-Ganey scores in the 91st, 97th, and 98th percentile. And we've wavered since then. We've gone down in some of those, and we've actually gone up in a couple of those as well. So it's something that we need to keep in front of our staff and the community. So just a couple pictures here. Like I said, these were taken right from the presentation that we had for the capital campaign. And when you've got 110 years worth of building, you're bound to show that it's got some age. That was our dining room for our long-term care facility. We used to have a 56-bed unit, and after that it was downsized to about a 46-bed unit on 2 different floors. And we spent a lot of time talking about whether we were going to continue to stay in long-term care. Our board of directors, we've been in long-term care since 1963, and we spent about 7 or 8 months in discussions at the board level about whether we wanted to stay in the business. And took a look at our mission statement and our strategic plan and felt like it was something that we still needed to continue to provide because of the reputation in the community. So we decided that we would forge ahead, but we would build a new one that was much more efficient, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, getting back to goals, when you first of all, make the entire building user-friendly was the first goal. When you start in 1901 and you've got different buildings over that lifespan, you're bound to have some hallways that don't match up. You've got some floors that have that A word that's mentioned in that causes a lot of angst and a lot of expense in getting those hazardous materials taken up. But straightening out hallways and making sure that services that are most accessible by the public are front and center. Physicians, we have all of our primary care doctors have their offices within our building, which makes it very convenient for patients, makes it very convenient for the doctors. So making it user-friendly for them so that they can go up the back corridors and check in on patients, maybe deliver a baby while they're still having office hours. That goes a long ways to making sure that your project's going to maximize its potential. And of course, staff. We actually put in some hallways that were back hallways and upper hallways that when we're transporting materials, when we're transporting pharmaceuticals, linens, and trash, that we're doing that above and out of the sight of visitors and patients. The other goal was to build to accommodate technology and now and into the future. Of course, everyone had Cat 5 wiring throughout the hospital. We decided that we would go with Cat 6, and now there's Cat 7. So you're never ahead of technology. It's always creeping up on you. But we also had the discussion. It's a good example of the fact that looking into the future, most of it we feel is going to move towards wireless. And I'm sure that most of you have wireless access for your patients and for your visitors, and we have it for our many of our applications as well. So even though you might get hung up in terms of each one of our rooms, and we did do that, we decided that we would network cable in every one of the hospital rooms, but also having the wireless technology and probably looking to have even more wireless technology into the future. But again, that's just a piece of building in flexibility, because as Dave talked about, we're looking at decreased inpatient, more and more outpatient, and with our physicians being located down in the same building, evolution of how we take care of patients. Who knows what we're going to be doing in 20 years? So we need to make sure that we've got a building that's flexible enough so that we can evolve with the care. We can always move walls, we can move departments, things like that. So we feel that we're well situated for the next 20, 30 years. Moving along, that's the new east entrance. We've got the north entrance, and now we've got the east entrance. That came after tearing down I believe that was the 1953 building. So we had to do this thing in pieces, and that's why it took us 2.5 years to complete it. One of the advantages, of course, with Greenfield is that you have the ability to do all of your construction, test things out, and make the move. We didn't have that luxury because we decided to do the build, the renovate, and demolition all at once. So here are a couple of schematics that were completed with our architect before the building project, and it's amazing what architects can do with their computers, because you take a look at this, and we didn't quite do the front lobby like this. However, you look at the floor and the entrance and the ceiling, and that's all how it looks now. This is incredible how this turned out, because that is exactly how it looks. We have one central corridor that runs the length of almost the entire property. I tell people that we've got 497 feet from one end of the hallway to the other. And that shouldn't be intimidating to people, because it's also like a strip mall. We feel that people need to be able to access services throughout the entire spine of the hospital. And then the final look is our long-term care dining room. Just to reference what we had before in the old 1963 building, quite a transformation. We decided to stay in long-term care, but we decided we needed to make sure that we did it right. So going from 56 beds down to 42 beds, and finally settling on 38 beds, but something that we all felt proud about. So let me get back to more of the meat of the discussion. Factors which influenced our decision to build. First of all, financial stability. Back when we did the 1993 building, we had a very difficult time with being able to cash flow that project. So we had to do a lot of downsizing and a lot of cost reduction in the late 90s. But being able to build on that and the momentum, we felt that we were in a good situation back in 2008 when we started these discussions. So by then we had financial stability was in place, and also looking at the environment. Interest rates, at that time, you remember the recession had just started, had really tanked, and interest rates were way down, trying to stimulate the economy. So we felt it was a good time for us to consider. But also interest rates on the other side of it, because as a public district hospital, we are limited in terms of where we can invest our excess funds. We're just like a school district. So we were investing in our CDs and getting those nice meaty returns of 0.5 or 0.2% on an annual basis. So when you sit down with your board of directors and say, okay, with that going on, our ability to borrow Of course, if you've got funds, which is another funny thing, the way that capital financing goes, the more funds that you have, the more cash that you have on hand, the more willing people are willing to lend to you. But also, if we've got money that's in the bank earning 0.5% interest, are we better off investing it at that time in our building? So again, below that, economy, construction business is weighed down. We felt that if we embarked on this project, again, starting the plan in 2008 and broke ground in 2010, we felt it was a good time to be in the construction project because of the bids that we felt that we would get. But when we look at the biggest factor for our influence on the decision to build is the future. One of the strengths of our organization has been the stability of our medical staff. We had a core, and we still have a good core group of primary care physicians. However, we were also looking at some retirements, probably about 4 of them within the next, well, we've had 2 of them, actually 3 of them now as of this month, and we've got another one coming up probably in a couple of years. And how do you replace those physicians? Well, one of those is being able to stand out when you're in competition for all of those medical residents, and you don't do that by sitting on your hands. If you've got a medical resident that's coming out to do a site visit, and you unroll some plans, some construction documents, and say this is what we'd like to be in a couple of years, that doesn't do the trick. You need to make sure that you're being progressive. You're reinvesting in not only the healthcare facilities, but also reinvesting in the community and in our physicians, putting the trust in them that we're going to give them the facilities and the equipment and the services they need to take care of those patients. So also looking at the future, reimbursement, we all know that as we look at the Affordable Care Act, one of the things that we are all taught is the fact that reimbursement is probably never going to be as good as it is right now. As a critical access hospital, we know that that's probably going to change for us, just like PPS hospitals, recognizing that if you're going to make a change, you probably need to do it as soon as possible, because reimbursement for those capital projects or reimbursement overall is probably not going to be any better. Recruitment, I talked about that, but not only for medical staff, therapists. We had, just to talk about one of the services that we have, we invested quite heavily in our therapy department. We had a very generous gift from a donor to install a therapeutic pool. And the pool is the type where you can walk out onto a platform. It lowers you into the water, and it accommodates at least 4, if not more, individuals to do therapy in that pool. It's worked out very well for us. It's increased our volume. The feedback that we get in the community is outstanding. But also, when you're trying to recruit therapists, and you do a tour of the hospital, you do a tour of the new physical therapy and occupational therapy space, and then you say, we got another little thing we'd like to show you. It does wonders for recruitment of therapists as well. And again, changes in healthcare. We talked about the fact that the types of patients that we're going to see are going to be different. So we need to make sure that we built in that flexibility to take care of those changing clienteles. One of the questions to consider: how would construction impact operations? Logistical challenges. Again, as we did a demolition, renovation, and construction project all at once, it created quite the challenges. And what we did is we really worked to turn them into opportunities. Our staff got really good at wayfinding and taking patients and saying, come with me, I'll show you where you need to go. My favorite example of that was we had to shut down the entire front of the hospital, and we had to bring patients in through the stairway exit. I don't know if IDPH came and looked at that or not. So hopefully, well, anyway, we got done with that, and no one said anything. But we actually had volunteers that would come to the front of the hospital starting at 6 in the morning to show our surgery patients how to maneuver through the through the path that was the temporary path that was through the front lobby and upstairs to our operating room. You can't thank them enough in terms of their willingness to help us out. New facilities. Surgery department was one of the growing departments that we felt we needed to invest in. Our therapies, which I mentioned previously, as well as long-term care. And the impact that's had on those operations has been substantial. I mentioned earlier the net revenue back in 2010 when we did the capital campaign was $26 million, and now it's $35 million. And when you look at these three departments, surgeries, therapies, and long-term care, we have seen substantial growth in all three of those areas. So why invest in, why renovate instead of a Greenfield project? We felt that we had made, over the last couple of years, quite an investment in our existing plant. We had built a new surgery department in 2002. We'd also built the physician's offices on site in 2002. We'd also, 2004, we added our 24 hospital beds on our third floor. So for us to walk away from that, looking at the return on that, what that would cost for us for additional construction, felt it was worth it for us to stay on site. And just I have history mentioned here. Back in 1987, the hospital actually acquired a parcel of property up by the interstate with plans to build a new hospital, but that didn't materialize, and I think they sold it within 3 or 4 years. So of course, we've all got people that have memories that long. So we're also able to reuse outdated buildings. Right now, I am sitting in the 1963 long-term care building, and our ability to reuse that, as long as it fit into our footprint, we felt it was well worth it because it's on the main highway that goes through town. And if people were able to see that we were reusing that building, it would go a long ways towards goodwill, rather than just leveling everything that was more than 15 years old. So we basically took this thing down to a shell of a building. In fact, the roof is so short, or the ceiling space is so short that our air handlers, all the air ducts are outside on the roof. But we felt that it's certainly meeting our needs. Green movement. We talked with our architects and our builders back in the planning process back in 2009, and they made that offer to us to say we could get you to LEED certification, but plan on increasing your cost by 20%. We presented that to our board of directors and had a discussion, and it all came back to financial return. We took a look at payback and what it could potentially save us for ongoing utility costs, and it just wasn't there. And for us to sell that to our community, and in terms of our capital campaign, we felt it was probably just not in the cards for us. Of course, Illinois has implemented some initiatives that are mandatory for any construction project. So we've got some electric timers for lights, motion detectors, things like that we've been able to reduce some of our utility costs. So all in all, it was quite a journey for us, and we're very pleased with the project. But it takes a lot of planning, and I just wanted to mention that regrets in terms of building project. Of course, I spent a lot of time. In fact, I basically served as the construction manager, between the builder and the architect throughout the entire project, and probably shouldn't have spent that much time doing that. Some decisions that we've made along the way. You always regret some of the cuts that you make to try to stay within budget, but all in all, we're very pleased with the project. And feel like it's going to meet our needs and meet our objectives that we started with. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dave Adcock.
Okay, thanks a lot, Brad. Well, I've been in both of your facilities, and they're both beautiful, so really appreciate your comments here today. We do have some questions online, and Dave Schreiner, I think I'm going to direct this first one to you. You actually talked about persuading your board and key constituents about projects with little or no ROI. Can you maybe expound on that? How did you go about that?
Well, it's not easy to do, Dave, and you really have to do more of an emotional appeal in some cases. And as soft and fuzzy as that sounds, there are some paybacks that you can give, but the strategy that we used was to define the patient experience. All of us have a brand that we very much want to protect, and we felt like the environment of care was not consistent with the brand that we wanted to have. As we do point towards a return on investment, you can certainly talk about things like value-based purchasing and safety, and those do have a real return. It's incredibly difficult to measure that, but we did know that we had some numbers that maybe weren't quite as good as Brad's on the patient experience side, but they were very strong with that. Many years in the top 5% in the country, and in order for us to continue that, we had to have an environment that supported it, and we didn't feel like it did. So it's pretty tough to do a pro forma that shows you're going to get a real return on it. Sometimes you have to convince your board that it's the right thing to do. Brad, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that as well.
I agree, Dave. If your goal is to increase patient satisfaction and they keep knocking you down with the environment issues, that's the ammunition you need to go back and convince your board it's going to take an investment, and it's not an investment that you're going to see a financial return, but you most likely will see it on your patient satisfaction and your HCAP scores.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. You also mentioned, and Brad and Dave both, you discussed, of course, working very closely with your boards in these efforts, but there were also some comments about using a team or a group of constituents to help gain input on your changes that you were going to make in your facilities. Brad, how did you go about that, and how did you select some of those participants?
I didn't talk about it, but we did have a community group that came in, and it was actually part of our capital campaign. We formed a committee that we kept them informed and got their input. So it wasn't just the inside users, but also out in the community. So we used them as spokesmen out in the community, and again, trying to get consensus on a set of plans when you've got a very diverse set of users makes it a challenge, but it also makes it very rewarding because you're able to do that based upon not just making decisions in a vacuum, I guess.
Dave, how about you? How did you go about selecting the group that I believe that you had mentioned, and in particular, did you engage patients in that?
Sure. When we talk about our internal customers, first of all, Dave, the one rule that I have is it's limited to high performers. So we want to have people that are most engaged with our patients, that are get the highest performance evaluations, that participate on the committees outside of just construction. So that's important to us to involve the high-performing employees. From the physician perspective, we want to obviously use the physicians that are most involved with the space. We did a new intensive care unit over the last 12 months or so. We went to our pulmonologists, we went to our surgeons, we went to our internal medicine physicians that serve as intensivists, and we asked for their input from that as well. From the community perspective, we found that very easy. When I had the opportunity to go to someone and say, how would you like to help the hospital in reinventing what we look like, that's a pretty compelling argument. And we had good success with those people being engaged and telling us what they like and what they don't like. And now some of the folks that participated in that are now moving on to a new patient experience committee that was meeting as we're talking here this morning at noon just outside of my office in the boardroom. And we go to them with everything about what's the appearance of our bills look like, what kind of services should we be offering that we're not offering, and then from a physical perspective, what do you think of the way the place looks, and how do we compare to other competition that might be out there. So I found that it's the community's hospital. Let's go to the community people and ask them what they like.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Brad has mentioned a couple times his capital campaign, in particular philanthropy. Brad, how did you set targets or goals, if you will, for the capital campaign, and did you achieve those?
Thank you, Dave, because it's a fun story to tell. We had a professional capital campaign consultant that came in interviewed a couple of key individuals in the community, made some estimates based upon her practice, and felt that we could raise $1.9 million is what she came up with. The problem that we had with that is that we had to raise that goal 2 more times because we kept achieving that. So it was very satisfying, and I think we have collected over 98% of those commitments. This is the last year of that 5-year commitment, so very pleased with that. And it all comes down to communicating of where we want to be and telling the story that that people are engaged in and feel compelled that they want to help, they want to be a part of it.
Dave, did you embark on any type of capital campaign or philanthropy opportunities with your expansions?
We did not do a capital campaign fund. We're now trying to build our fund development bank, so to speak, and we're putting that towards community health improvement. So we've chosen to put it towards service line as opposed to bricks and mortar.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Brad, this question is also directed to you. So why did you reduce the number of long-term care beds, and how are you making up the revenue lost from the reduction?
That's a good question, and it all goes back to critical access hospital reimbursement, because long-term care is not reimbursed under critical access hospital Medicare reimbursement. So any costs that go into long-term care are allocated out of the cost report and not reimbursed. So the larger your footprint, the more cost that that service attracts on the cost report. So when you've got 2 different floors that aren't being fully utilized, it's attracting a lot of costs that will not be reimbursed. By downsizing it, reducing the footprint, reducing the number of beds, and also being able to justify charging more, because it's a very nice facility and compares very well in the area. We not only felt, but we were able to document that it would be well worth it for reimbursement on critical access side, but also for long-term care. We average 95% self-pay in our long-term care.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Both of you in your expansion activities, I didn't hear any comments on this, but did you proceed through the certificate of need process, and after that, what kind of time frame were you looking from the Illinois Department of Public Health for occupancy? And Dave, maybe I could direct that to you initially.
Right. We were not required to go through the CON process for our intensive care unit that we opened, but we did build an emergency department and outpatient surgery facility, and we were required to go through the CON process for that. We did hire a consultant to help us that was extremely helpful in guiding us through. And my only thought is that because of some of the, maybe instability is the right word, about what the Certificate of Need Board is, how it's composed, and the individuals on it, they've had issues recently about just having a quorum. So my only advice might be, if you have to go the route of the CON, give yourself a much longer timeline than you might anticipate.
Thank you, Dave. Brad, how about you and your experience?
Similar. We hired a consultant that determined that the scope of our project was sufficient enough on the outpatient side and long-term care that it did not meet the threshold for certificate of need. And I think that Dave did a nice job of walking around or tiptoeing through a very delicate delicate issue at the state level with the CON board and the trials and tribulations that they've gone through.
Okay, thank you. If we have any other more questions, please feel free to post them at this time.
Dave, I have one concept that I'd like to throw out there if I could, and get your thought and Brad's thought on that. As we look at this climate, Brad described it so well as this political uncertainty that's prevalent out there. One of the questions that we discuss with our board is, what's the right amount of days cash on hand? Should we be looking towards investments and building the foundation, or should we be taking the dollars and resources that are available to us and putting it back into the community, so to speak, through building projects, through service line expansions? You know, is there a magic number out there around how much cash a hospital and health system should save, as opposed to how much they should plow back into taking care of the patients and meeting the mission of the organization.
Brad, you want to take that first?
That's a good question. I wish I had the answer because we've had the same discussion in terms of what that right level is. But it's a good sign when you've got the ability to have those discussions, because if if you're down below, if you're in single digits, 50 days, 60 days, or something like that, you know that you've got a long ways to go before you can feel safe enough to have those discussions. But yeah, we struggle with that same question.
Well, and Dave, from my experience and coming from a very conservative organization, it was a lot. Was the right answer. But in this day and age, and I think you touched on this very early on in your presentation, you're seeing from year to year, I think you said 15 to 20% a decline in your inpatient population and related reimbursements. And when you see changes in the financial reimbursement like that, and I don't know, maybe in your case you might want to comment on this, is outpatient able to pick up the change, if you will, or the reductions in those reimbursements? Have you seen that at KSB?
We have been fortunate in that the increases that we've had in the ambulatory combined with the physician side, at least at this point, are outweighing the reductions that we've experienced on the inpatient side. So we're floating just underneath that 4% margin right now. Our budget is 3%. That's year-to-date in 2014 on a calendar year. So, and we've done that in spite, again, of the inpatient side, at least from a financial perspective, underperforming. We've more than made up with that with some expansions in the other two areas.
Brad, how about at Hammond-Henry?
We've been fortunate. We've experienced the reduction on inpatient as well, and continue to see upticks with outpatients. So it's been good for us. Not great for us, but staying ahead of the curve. Our margins are not as big as they used to be because we got a lot of depreciation expense on the books. So we take a look at things like EBITDA and cash flow and those types of numbers, recognizing that those expenses, those non-cash expenses, are going to drag down that return.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We do not have any other questions posted on the webinar at this time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, and I'm going to ask her if she could wrap us up for the day. Leslie?
Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to thank a stellar moderator and presenters for their excellent presentation today on building the hospital of tomorrow. This concludes the webinar for today. Please take the opportunity to complete the short survey once you receive it after this webinar. And thank you very much for attending, and I hope you all have a great day.